I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for your participation, especially if you are joining this meeting in an unconventional meeting time. This session is Fair for Research Software or Fair for RS. Today we are going to present the working group updates. This presentation was led by the steering committee, which members you can see on the screen. For housekeeping, the way that we are going to lead this session is by using collaborative documents. If you just joined, you can see in the chat as well, we have copied the collaborative notes that we would like you to use for note taking and for giving feedback during community consultation. And there's also the slides that I'm presenting here that you can take and watch them again whenever you need. As the meeting is being recorded, we would like everyone to be in listen only mode. Please write your questions in the chat if you have them. And if you wish to speak, you can raise your hand via the participants list and someone will let you unmute and discuss. Just a reminder again, this meeting is being recorded and the benefit of people not being able to attend at the moment to watch it later. The way that we are going to proceed with this session is I am going to be the moderator of this session. My name is Paula Andrea Martinez. I'm going to introduce the group and how we've been working. If you are new to the group, there's a lot of new information for you. If you've been working with us, you will know that we've been working in subgroups, 4 of them, and each of the leads will present the updates. Then we will have a discussion separated in breakout rooms, and then one of the representatives of that group will report back. We will finalize this session with future work and logistics, and we hope you can benefit from this community consultation, not just being updated, but also providing your feedback. Let's start with the welcome and introductions. We are pasting again the links in the chat, and you also have the slides available for later. We would like to start this session by acknowledging a lot of people that has been working really hard during the last few months for this working group. We already have about 140 members, and some of you are present here. You can see some of them might have joined another session or might be in a very inadequate time to join, but we still would like to acknowledge them all. We also like to acknowledge the steering committee. We are 9 members, and one of them has changed. We welcome the new member. And we would like to thank Software Heritage for sponsoring attendance to this meeting. The link to our group is held by RDA, and you can find it on the screen. If you are new to the group, and because we are wanting to give you all the updates that we possibly can today, our group has started a long back. So it actually started with the virtual plenary 15 when we had a both out of the software source code working interest group, and then we started working with a few people that were very interested. We've just been endorsed in September 2020, so that's when our clock started ticking for our milestones. Not only we are part of RDA, but we are also a working group in Force 11, and we are also a task force of Research Software Alliance, also called RISA. The way that we wanted to work with this group is that allowing everyone who wants to join, RDA allows for free membership, so that is our main door for you to join us if you haven't yet. We are also, all of the members in the group are coordinating a lot of community discussions on how to effectively apply the FAIR principles to research software and how can we achieve the adoption of these principles. The FAIR principles contribute to addressing challenges in regard to research data. The FAIR principles at a high level are intended to be applied to all research objects, both used in research and those used in research outputs. However, we would like to acknowledge that software is not just data. And the focus and the motivation for this group to continue working is achieve the adaptation and adoption of the new FAIR principles for research software. We have a series of deliverables for our working group, which is in a total of 18 months. We separated them in different sections. So at the first milestone in 6 months, which is around March next year, we would like to present the community with a document that not only the group has participated in forming, but also you have put your input into this. So we will really emphasize that we would like to have as much as your support in your community feedback for the new FAIR principles for research software. Our second milestone is providing a guideline on how to apply those FAIR principles for research software. And the third milestone is a document summarizing the process that we've taken during these 18 months. So for an icebreaker activity, I see some people have just joined. We have in the chat 2 of these tiny URLs that are our working documents. The first one is our slides, and then it's our collaborative documents. I'd like you to please invite you to go and write your name and a little bit of your details. If you've been part of the group, if you're working any of the subgroups, if you are new, we would like to reiterate the welcome. So please take 2 minutes for that. If you are lost in the, a lot of people is writing already. So that's page 3. We have a table there. I'll let 1 minute for people to finish writing what they are currently writing. Most of you have finished already typing your name to the attendance list. Thank you for that. And we'll continue with the updates. So the way that we work, even before having the official approval for RDA, we started to collect some feedback by inviting the community to join 4 different subgroups. The aim of this is to gather knowledge from experts around FAIR principles for data, people who are working as research software engineers, publishers and funders. And we wanted to hear from your opinion and start the discussion. So this subgroups had started during July, and we wanted to work towards this presentation until the end of the year. Subgroup number 1 is about having a fresh look on FAIR for research software, not looking at previous analysis that have been done, and start a new discussion. FAIR for the second subgroup is FAIR work in other contexts, and we acknowledge that it's not a group at the same time talking about notebooks, but you can see the recording if you were not here. Number 3 is focusing on the research software definition, which is a topic that we really emphasize because we are talking about research software without having a concise and agreed research definition yet, research software definition. So it was an extensive discussion that we are continuing. And group number 4 is new research related to FAIR software. So the way that I'm going to do this now is invite each of the leads to present their updates. Starting with subgroup 1, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Dan Katz. So our group was trying to look at the FAIR principles in the context of research software from scratch, because there's a paper that was written about a year or so ago. And we wanted not to look at that paper, but just to take a completely fresh look and see what we came up with and then compare with that paper. We had a group with about 15 people that read the original FAIR principles paper. This was the FAIR for Data paper. We went through and voted on each of the 19 principles and voted whether they applied as written, applied with changes, or didn't apply. And then we took that voting information, put it into a new document, and started discussing within the Google document each of these points, like why we thought it didn't apply or why we thought it did apply or things like that. And then after we'd done that for a while, we then wrote a new draft document on FAIR principle for research software that was intended to kind of take that and to be a consensus report of that. We're iteratively working through the document now. We've come to agreement on most of it, I think. We've turned out that working entirely offline wasn't quite enough. And so we've had a couple of virtual meetings and have one more coming up next week that I hope will be enough to wrap things up. Next slide, please. So the draft document that we're working on now basically starts by explaining the differences between data and software. And then we did an initial translation of the principles, basically kind of a word-for-word translation where we expanded metadata out to originally metadata and data, and then made it metadata and software to translate it for software. We then kind of continued taking our discussion and tried to see what does all of this mean? How do we need to change things for software? We have a new principle that we will be adding somewhere that will say metadata about software should follow the FAIR data principles. And that just kind of helps fix some of the things that were in the original principles. And when they translated, they got a little bit mixed up, and this kind of brings it all back together. The findable and accessible parts basically don't really change very much. The software being findable and accessible is pretty much the same as data, but it becomes obvious as we go through this that there are gaps in terms of identifiers and metadata and a few other things that we need to bring out to people's attention. Interoperability is kind of different. We believe, or at least we're proposing, that interoperability here should be focusing on the exchange of FAIR metadata or data between different software activities. And reusability, which in some sense is really usability, also needs to be updated because data is used in a completely different way than software is used. The using has a very different meaning for these two. So we've exposed a bunch of gaps, as I mentioned, gaps around metadata and identifiers, but also gaps around the complexity of software, the fact that software can include documentation, and it can include data, and it can include license files and text and other things. And then documentation itself is also a little bit of a challenge in how we deal with that. And so we hopefully will have then a new statement of FAIR for research software principles. And that'll be basically the end of the document. And so once we've done that, then we either will compare our principles with the principles that were written again about a year ago, or we will combine with the other subgroups that you're going to hear from next and compare the combined results of all 4 subgroups with that paper. And we haven't quite decided which one yet. So that's subgroup 1.
Thank you, Dan.
Hi, I'm Michelle Barker, and I was the lead of subgroup 2, Fair Work in Other Contexts. So our aim here was to broaden our thinking by thinking about how other research objects, other than data and software, had applied the FAIR principles and whether we should be thinking about some quite different angles by looking at their work. So the 4 pieces that we aim to look at were computational notebooks, training materials, computational workflows, which was a piece we didn't complete. We're very conscious that there's probably 20 resources in that area, and a community around Workflow Hub and other groups that are looking at that. And resourcing didn't enable us to really encompass that all of that work, but that certainly needs to be included as we go forward. And a fourth type was other types of research objects. We've drafted a final report and the links there that you can go and have a look at, which identifies the areas of interest that came out of that analysis and could potentially inform then how we draft recommendations of applying the FAIR principles to software and potentially lead to some later development of broader FAIR principles for all research objects. To give you just a little taste of what we came up with in terms of the training materials, there were simple ideas about ways to ensure that course materials could be more fair, that perhaps we could think about applying to software training materials as we develop the software principles. Next slide, please. For computational notebooks, we identified some of the challenges there and good key issues to consider. And for research objects in general, we found that there were issues to do with PIDs and with specialized registries. And again, that software citation is important. So we will be adding those into the mix as we continue to think about how we draft the FAIR principles with the work of the other groups. The work of this group's now finished, but as the others wind up, then we'll start to think about how we integrate them all together. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you, Michelle. We have now Moran.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. My name is Moran Green-Peter, and I'm the lead of subgroup 3, research software definition. I'm also a software engineer and a metadata specialist for Software Heritage Archive. The subgroup aim was to review existing definitions and actually really identify the scope of the FAIR principles for research software, because when we talk about FAIR principles for software, it's very large. And if we want to really capture the principles for research software, we do need a definition. What does this mean? So we had some goal measurements to be specific. So we wanted a concise community definition, which is hard to have, and measurable, citable, and easy located. We have it assigned to this subgroup 3, and we had a very nice discussion on the Gitter chat and on the document that you can access in the link above with the subgroup name. First, we wanted to end our work in October, and I see that we haven't gotten to that yet. So hopefully we'll have something more concrete to present for a community review before December. We, at the moment, collected quotes, and the discussion that was very interesting was about reviewing existing example of software and saying, is this software, is it research software, is it not research software, or maybe it is, maybe it's not. So we did this discussion on the document and in the chat, and we voted on these examples. To show you a little bit what this meant for us, I will ask Paula to go to the next slide, where I show 3 examples here, and this is something that we will discuss in the breakout rooms on my breakout room about research software definition. So we have Excel, which is a commercial software, which is very used a lot for data and for research, and then asking yourself, would it be considered for the FAIR principles? That's a good question. We have Scala, that started as a research project at the University of Lausanne and has become a language that's used in industry and in research. So that's also a good question to ask ourselves. Is this considered research software? Maybe it was considered in 2001 or 2004, but maybe today it's not considered research software. And we have the third example, which is a Seagull module, which is completely research software because it's deposited in the research archive, the HAL National Archive, and there's a citation and everything. So some of the questions that we asked ourselves to answer the question, if this is research software, are the question that you see here on the slide. Would a researcher be expected to cite this software by the citation? Is there a research result that is dependent on this software? So maybe Excel can be considered for that, but maybe not. Was the software evaluated or reviewed as part of a research process? But those are some of the subjects that we covered and still are discussing. Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Marianne. Next, we have subgroup 4, led by Neil.
Thanks, Paula. My name is Neil Chuhong from the Software Sustainability Institute. And I'm leading subgroup 4, which is around new research related to FAIR software. So the aim of this subgroup was to look at things that had been published since the Towards Fair Principles for Research Software paper came out, which was roughly about this time last year, and understand whether there are any existing, whether there's any new lessons to be learnt from the research and the reports that have been published since then. The other thing around that is, as part of this group, we were looking to assess the Towards Fair Principles for Research software paper. And with that in mind, we've started to undertake a similar survey to the one that Dan carried out on the original FAIR Principles to get feedback on these rewritten FAIR Principles. And this survey is still running, and I'll put a link to that on the next slide for people who would like to get involved and provide their input. The subgroup 4 is running a little bit later than the other 3 subgroups, so we are still working on analysing some of the results. But if you go on to the next slide, Paula, some of the things that are coming up from the survey are similar, I think, to what's being found in the other subgroups, and I think we need to understand how we combine the results that are coming from this subgroup with the other ones. So things like the findability and accessibility being the easiest of the rewritten principles in the paper to understand how to apply to software. There is a question around the role of platforms like digital repositories, which could be used to store research objects and help make software findable and accessible, and whether there is a benefit to considering not just how you can measure the fairness of software itself, but perhaps you can measure its fairness by understanding where it is found. So is it enough, is software automatically fair, for instance, if it has a DOI? There's still some clarity around some of the terms used in the rewritten principles. Some of the respondents found the language that was used there hard to understand. So I think there is something to be understood around how we translate from what was the language for data through to language for software that's understandable to different types of stakeholders, from people involved in research data management and libraries to researchers and research software engineers. And another thing that came up was around complex software objects, which Michelle has touched upon in her group, and understanding how these should be considered by the principles. I think the other thing to note here is that we asked people to suggest both additional reports and publications, but also examples of software and why they thought it was fair or not fair. One of the challenges I think we will face in applying FAIR to research software and drafting these principles is ensuring that people have the same perception around how FAIR is applied. And there's a lot of discussion, I think, to be had around whether or not there are different levels of fairness, and whether we are in a similar situation to linked data, where we might have an aspirational 5-star level, but also other levels that will be fair enough. So as I mentioned, we're still looking for feedback. Please do take the survey. If you're signed up to the group, you will have received an email earlier this week with the link in it. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you to all the subgroup leads. We have an extra report to give about related efforts and activities led by one of our steering committee members.
Yes, hi again. So I just wanted to invite you to check out the FAIR's FAIR report. So report which is completely consecrated to the fairness of software subject. In the report, we analyzed 9 different resources that talk about FAIR and software, or best practices or guidelines for research software. You can go on Zenodo and read the report, or even comment it on the, there's a Google Doc for commenting. And there will be a free access webinar on Monday, November 23rd. And the link is in the slides. I can put also the link in the chat for you to join me and hear about this report.
Thank you, Moran. Also to acknowledge that this group has been invited to review the paper before it's being put on Zenodo. So we have a lot of feedback there as well. Okay, the next session, the next part of this session is group discussions, and we've decided to do group discussions focusing on some of the questions that are being touched by the subgroup's work. I'd like to give you the opportunity to pick the topic that you would like to discuss by adding number 1 next to your name, or at the beginning of your name for software documentation and principles. Number 2 at the beginning of your name if you want to talk about community consultation on the draft of the FAIR for research software principles. Number 3, if you would like to discuss research software definition. And because it's going to take me a few minutes to put people into the breakout rooms.
Maybe on the time that you put the people on the breakout group, I see that there are 2 questions in the chat, and we can answer that. Yeah, okay, sorry.
So we welcome your questions and we'll discuss. I stopped sharing. I hope everyone has seen the group discussions. They're also on our collaborative documents.
So maybe we could start with Walmart's question. I'm not sure who it was aimed at.
Well, I can read out Walmart's question. Or Walmart, would you like to present it?
Oh, my question. So I was trying to find where I should type my number on the document. Maybe someone else is also having trouble finding where. But my question was, have you considered curation or security review of distribution artifacts or dependencies for research software as part of the reuse criteria? Because that's something that I've experienced that, I mean, it's difficult to recommend something that the IT department won't let you install.
While someone gets ready to answer that, I'll just say to change your participant name. If you're in Zoom, down the bottom, there's a menu of things like mute, stop video, participants. Click on participants and a list of names will come up with yours at the top. If you hover over yourself, you should get a blue button that says more or something similar, and then can rename. Maureen?
Thanks.
Yes, so I was going to answer about the security review of the distribution. It wasn't part of our discussion on subgroup 1, as I remember, but the dependencies are a very big part of if it's something that should be included in the FAIR principles for research software, and where, if it's part of reuse or interoperability. Maybe Dan can add something about that discussion on subgroup 1.
I don't really think that there's very much that I can add. You know, we didn't really talk about that at all. I mean, I think what you said is complete. We talked about dependencies. We didn't talk about security review.
But if we are opening that discussion here, security review, I think that's a much more complex to integrate into the FAIR principles. FAIR principles shouldn't be about the correctness of the software or the security of the software itself. It's more about the research artifact that is curated enough to be found, are accessible, but that's an interesting point, and I'm taking it into consideration now that you've said it.
I also wondered.
Yeah.
This. I'm sorry. I also wondered, and this is maybe kind of bouncing it back to Dan with one of his other hats on, whether this has come up in FAIR for machine learning models. The idea of security and assurance feels like it fits better once we get into more complex dependencies and things where we don't have as much transparency as we might have with source code. But that's possibly for a different discussion.
Yeah, I could just say really quickly that the first part is that the FAIR for machine learning work that we've done so far is to make a poster. And that's really the extent of our work. So the answer to that would be no. But just thinking about it really quickly, I think what we're thinking about of machine learning models generally are effectively our sets of data that go with particular models, right? The configuration for different classes of models. So there it seems like security is actually not really an issue because it's the software in some sense is much more fixed. But I don't know, we'll see if that comes up once we get past the making a poster and talking stage. There's also a question from Mark. I don't know if we should try to answer that one before we go into breakouts, or if we should go into breakouts and come back. Somebody else can decide.
I think a quick answer to Mark is yes, something like Smart API might help in as much as it's a kind of a place to collect metadata about APIs and therefore potentially would help describe software. But I guess the thing here is more how would you ensure that people used it in a way that helped improve the fairness of their software?
Yeah, that was one of the more recent funding programs for data management software that we did. I tried to encourage our team to require the Smart API so that it would in essence create a default registry of these software applications and platforms and the like. But it was felt that you couldn't tell a developer what API to use. I kind of disagreed with the team, but I think it's one of those things where if the community sees value in something like the Smart API and creating something like a registry of software and capabilities as well as data in case it's a repository, then it's a matter of agreeing as a community, but also maybe having some funders that agree to require it in return for money.
I was just going to say quickly, the US NIH Data Commons was using Smart APIs as a requirement for services for that reason, but not actually for software that wasn't a service.
Yeah, I think it was created by the NIH project. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your questions. We really appreciate your feedback. So now to clarify the instructions for the breakout rooms, you've been assigned now to a group, whether it was your decision or you've been randomly assigned. We will have 30-minute discussions. So do a roundtable for introductions, who's in your group, about 5 minutes, and then the group lead is going to present the question and the motivation. Then you can start your discussion. Out of experience, it is best that you start writing some thoughts in the collaborative notes and then start the discussion. So we still have some written feedback out of the breakout rooms. We've extended the sharing of the outcomes. It's not going to be just 2 minutes. It's going to be 5 minutes after the 30 minutes. but I'll let you know when the time comes. Please select someone to represent your group for the feedback once you are back, and write as many notes as you can. So you're all now into breakout rooms. I'll see you again in 30 minutes. I might jump in to see if everything's all right. Please click on the join button on your screen.
Paula, you put me in room 2. Can you put me, dispatch me to room 3?
Right. Okay, sorry. Move to room 3. Okay. Did you get the invitation?
No. Ah, yeah.
Okay. For those of you watching the recording, we had 30 minutes breakout rooms for discussions, and now I'm going to invite everyone to come back to the main room and summarize those discussions. Welcome back, group 3.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. So now it's time for reporting. Who's the representative of group 1, please? Let's keep it short, 3 minutes each.
How about if we go in opposite order this time?
Group 3 first.
Yeah.
No problem. I'll go first. So we had a really interesting discussion to which we didn't come to a conclusion because the subject is very hard. Also, the examples that I've presented, Excel and Scala, are difficult examples because you can this is something that we discussed. It is something that you can consider as part of the environment of the or a platform or an application, and not the object itself. So we had this discussion. Now, one of the comments was Neil's comment in the beginning of our session about when we say we should apply fair principles to research software, do we mean that we are able to measure the software against the principles, or do we mean that we seek that anything considered research software must meet the fair principles for research software? So there's a lot of things to continue after this session, and also for subgroup 3. It was a very lively discussion, and I think that seeing this here on this session, I really think that we should do a call for subgroup 3 with the subgroup 3 participants, and if some of you are interested in this subject, we can also invite the full FAIR for Research Software community. So that was us. I don't know if I have more time to say other things, but I want to thank. 1 minute. So I want to thank my the participants for my subgroup. It was it was very interesting for me, this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Moran. Group number 2.
So we were talking about community engagement. So we have this situation now set up where we will wrap up the work of the subgroups that was talked about before, the breakout groups, and begin to draft some principles. And then we need to have extensive community consultation to make sure that that the drafting includes a whole range of use cases, but also to begin that socialization process. So we were starting to tease out how some of this might occur. So we aware that we have to engage with communities ranging from discipline communities to national communities to different types of stakeholders like publishers and funders and research software engineers. And there's also communities with particular interests like curation or preservation or metadata, etc. So we were reflecting on the fact that it would be easy to begin working with the early adopters and the pros and cons of that approach. Obviously, it's much more feasible and realizable to work with a smaller group who already understand the FAIR principles, but we're looking at some of the negatives in terms of creating rifts and even bigger breaks between the bigger community, and the extent to which, therefore, a much wider socialization of FAIR as applied to software needs to be continued, part of our aims as well. I'm just quickly looking through the notes to see if I left anything out there. And we wondered whether we should differentiate between those groups that will want to apply the principles once they're agreed versus those that are needed in their design. But we decided that was a difficult line to draw, actually, that the people who are going to need to apply them do also still need to have a key role in thinking about how they're designed to ensure that they can then create and be involved in their adoptability. So thank you to my group. If there was any other points that I omitted, please chime in.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, and so then for group 1 on documentation, this went quite differently than I thought it was going to, which is good because there were some very different views than the set of us that have been in subgroup 1. There's a lot of different things that people think about as documentation. I mean, many more than I was thinking of initially. And when we think about documentation, there's probably some kind of a multi-dimensional space that we could put everything in, which we didn't actually do, including whether the documentation is generated from within the code or if it's external, who it's for, and what it's for. And for all those things, there kind of are potentially somewhat different answers for how that gets treated. And how it relates to fairness, I think. But overall, as we were thinking that the documentation, if it's internal to the software, then we kind of handle it within the software. If it's external, we could use something like Bagot to think of that as to think of a larger object that is the software plus the documentation of whatever kinds of form it's in. We did think that if documentation is external, then it should be fair, and fair for a document is probably quite a bit easier than fair for software. So that's something probably good. We had some discussions about whether whether documentation was metadata or not, and kind of decided that documentation really by default and today isn't metadata, but that it could be made metadata in some ways. And if we were going to do that, we would have to expand potentially the schemas that we use to talk about software to include some pieces of what is now in documentation. And then finally, we think that documentation actually has a role in all 4 of the letters in FAIR, that it helps make software findable because it includes information about the software that people might be querying, that it can make software accessible because it can include things like a signature on the software that then makes it clear that you're actually getting the right software that you thought you were getting. or that nobody's tampered with it, or you're getting the right version, or things like that. That it can make the software interoperable because it can include machine readable APIs and various things that lets either machines or people figure out how to use the software with other software, and that it can be, and then that it definitely makes software reusable or even just usable because it tells you how to build it and how to actually make use of it. So I don't, it's funny, I don't know that I can actually summarize this in any way other than that there's a lot of interesting thoughts here that kind of are making me think a little bit differently about how we need to treat documentation as we go forward. And so I want to thank the 5 people that were also in this group very much. And I think this was a little less than 3 minutes. So if anybody else from the group wants to say anything quickly, please do if I missed something. Okay, thank you.
Thanks everyone for participating from this discussion. I think the way that we're going to do is, first I acknowledge that you've written notes and those notes are being used in a way that we can communicate back to our group. So whether you are a member or not, you'll see updates in the posts tab under the working group. We are going to summarize those and put it back. So just to wrap us up, the last 15 minutes, I'm gonna go back and share my screen. Please, Michelle.
Thanks, Paula. So just to spend a few minutes talking about what's next. So part of it is continuing to wrap up the work of the subgroups, as we talked about before the break, and begin drafting some principles, and then we hope by early next year to be able to share those. And as I said in my summation of our subgroup, then we're aware that we need extensive community engagement, and the FAIR's FAIR report that Marianne talked about earlier really reinforces that as well. So if you look in the collaborative notes documents, I think it's about page 14 now, as we've scrolled further and further down, we have these, yes, it is page 14. We have these questions that we'd still like to continue to gather input from you all on. Firstly, it's around what other RDA initiatives we really need to be aware of. We already have a close relationship with the software source code interest group, and we're aware of the work of QR FAIR and been tracking a little bit of what they're doing. If there are other groups, please add those into the list, and very happy when I've gone through this slide if people also want to say a few words about other things we should be thinking about. It would be fantastic if people had suggestions on 2021 events that we could become involved in. That would be a good way to access a particular community or part of the FAIR community or the research community. At the moment, we will be involved in Collaborations Workshop 2021 that's UK based, and the WAS 2021, which is an acronym like the Workshop of Scientific Sustainable Software. Not quite that. Maybe someone who knows it can put it in the chat. Later next year, they're both events that will probably have FAIR for Research Software as one of their major themes as a way to really engage. We'll be running events ourselves, of course, and working with our partners, RDA, RESA, and Force 11. But we're very interested if you can suggest ideas for us. And the third dot point is then also, we particularly like to know where there's organisations we could work with on this. We're probably not going to be able to deliver all the workshops that we'd like to ourselves as a 9-member of committee. But we have 140 members, and we're really looking for people who are willing to assist in working through some of the consultation in their own community. So you might be part of an organisation, or you might be part of an initiative, or you may be an individual who is simply willing to help lend a bit of your time to that. So again, you can put some ideas into the document there. And then the last question when we're also looking for a bit of input is, what are the materials that would really help facilitate the discussion? So we will have some reports that we've collated from our subgroups and what led us to developing the draft principles, and we'll have the draft principles. But as we go into a wide range of communities with different backgrounds, different potential ways in which they apply the FAIR principles, different levels of familiarity with them, we're very open to ideas on what else we could produce to help achieve that. So just before I do my final summation, is there anyone who wanted to say a few words to share ideas on where else we could do some community engagement or how? All good? Then we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Paula. To make you aware of another initiative that we're working with, we're aware that once we have the principles agreed by middle to late next year, then there in theory needs to be an even larger piece of work over a number of years to think about how to get them adopted. So we started a project called the FAIR for Research Software Roadmap that acknowledges, if you look at all that's happened in FAIR data over the past 3 to 4 years, there have been many, many different projects with focuses ranging from FAIR curriculum development for data to FAIR data repository certification to FAIR data interoperability. There's been a FAIR initiatives in different discipline communities, etc. So we probably need to do a lot of that now when we have the FAIR for Research Software principles. So the roadmap work aims to identify which are some of the focus areas we need to really look at and which ones to do first. For example, maybe we need FAIR software metrics earlier rather than later. To identify groups that are already doing something in those areas and to bring them together to have some discussions about the resourcing they might need over the next year or two to adopt that and begin to map what's coming, what needs to come next. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to get involved or stay involved, we have some events coming up. You can join our FAIR for Research Software working group through the RDA website if you haven't already. We have a workshop similar to this one, giving an update on our working group at Source next week, which is the series of research software engineering events. The FAIR's FAIR work that we mentioned that's relevant have an event on the 23rd of November, and then starting next year we'll have a whole range of events including the collaborations workshop. If you're interested in the roadmap concept, there was a BOF yesterday and the recording of that will be available on the RDA dashboard probably tomorrow. We have another event on that on the 1st of December, or you can sign up to get updates on that work as well. Last slide, thanks Paula. So just to conclude, thank you very much for your time today and for your energy and contributions to the breakout groups and the chat. We've got just a couple of minutes left. If anyone had any final comments, any of the working group steering committee or other members, you're welcome to share your thoughts.
I wanted to say that the collaborative notes, I know it's been a rush on this session, so feel free during this month to add information to that, especially if you have contact details to add. And because we are rerunning this session at Sourcey, we will welcome your input before the 17th as well, if you can make that.
Michelle or Paula, can I also ask that you capture whichever one of you is the host, I guess you, Paula, if you could please capture the chat and make that available after the session. There's been some interesting discussion in the chat also.
Yes, we will do that.
Thank you.
I would say rather than making it available separately, we could just paste the relevant questions that aren't the links to the slides just into the notes. If that's okay, Andrew.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Walmart has a hand up.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have had any interactions with the communities of research software engineers before who doesn't have a pre-existing knowledge of FAIR or the FAIR principles. So I think that there's, or I know that I'm going to be attending a research software research software engineering conference later on this year. And I'm not sure everyone is familiar with the FAIR principles, but this topic, I think, should be interesting for just about anyone if presented in a good manner or a simple manner.
We certainly have talked to a range of the RSE associations, and there have been a number of other talks that we've given at events in the last couple of months, such as the New Zealand software conference, research software conference. I think there was potentially one scheduled for the German RSE workshop, but I'm not sure if that got locked in. But if individuals are interested in presenting on this, we're very happy to help share our materials so that people can help spread the word.
Yeah, just to add to that, I'm going to paste the link in the chat about the community engagement activities that had happened during the year. And if you would like to add to that, please do.
And I think we're probably done. Thank you again for your time. I think RDA now has a networking event starting in a few minutes. I've been to a couple of others on previous days. They're fun and a good way to engage with your colleagues on a completely different topic to work. So I recommend trying one if you haven't yet. But thank you for your time today. And we look forward to engaging with you all again sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.